name is Peter John Garthland. I'm working as a consultant for Financial Counselling Australia. Financial Counselling Australia is the peak body for financial counsellors in the country, and provides and financial counsellors, just by way of brief background, provides free and independent advice to Australians that are in financial difficulty. It's funded by both the federal and state governments, and there are approximately 850 odd financial counsellors that work throughout the corners of Australia, assisting approximately 130,000 people in financial difficulty per year. Is to provide free to people who are in financial difficulty for whatever reason, be it to do with unemployment, underemployment, family breakdown, possible financial exploitation, and other financial kind of literacy issues. The financial counselling sector has been quite interested and involved in the issues coming out of the National Redress Scheme, and you have in front of you a submission that talks about the importance of having some access to free and independent advice at the time when people will be receiving their lump sum. Now, obviously, I need to start from straight away by saying that it is someone's inalienable right to do with the money that they receive what they wish, and I'm not here at all to suggest otherwise. But I do believe that financial counsellors can provide additional support to people, particularly at the time when they're considering the receipt of a lump sum payment, in regards to essentially maximising the benefit of the lump sum, irrespective of the amount, and minimising the risk that may well occur as a result of receiving that lump sum. So by maximising the benefit, as senators may well be aware, the Commonwealth Government passed legislation to provide opportunities for people that receive the lump sum where they're exempted from the incomes test and Centrelink, exempted from taxation, Commonwealth debt, and other kind of bankruptcy and public housing tenancy related issues. So the government have done some good work there to legislate to quarantine in effect the amount of the lump sum payment. That hasn't been translated across into industry. So for example, what we don't want to see happen is people receive a lump sum payment and then the banks themselves essentially use that lump sum to avail themselves of someone's debt. And equally, you don't want to see people's family members or others take advantage of the fact that people are receiving a lump sum. So all of that's got to do with, I believe, of having a financial counselling program that's there to support people to carry out that particular work. We, in our submission, essentially are saying very simply two things. Firstly, the Department of Social Service, which funds about 30% of financial counselling throughout Australia, has said that the existing funding arrangements for financial counselling is enough for those people to receive financial counselling support. That happens in two ways. There's a 1800 007 007 National Debt Helpline number, and there's also face-to-face financial counselling services. What we said to DSS is that it's erroneous to think that existing services, which like most other community-based services are overstretched to start with, would be in a position to take on these particular kinds of cases. We've argued that in part there needs to be extra resources for no more legal service, so that there's a more complementary approach to people that are seeking support through that good service, as well as the National Debt Helpline staffing levels. The other point that we've made to DSS is the existing agencies that they currently fund, half of them are faith-based institutions. And so what we're really concerned about is that, if DSS is suggesting that these services are there to support people, someone that was sexually abused by the Catholic Church will not want to go and see someone from Anglicare or someone from the Salvation Army. And when you consider that, for example, in Tasmania, Anglicare is the sole employer of financial counsellors, and throughout the country 50% of financial counselling services are faith-based institutions, you don't want to have the risk of people accessing services where they may well in fact walk away from them. So in part, I think that there can be some really positive benefits for claimants at the time that they're receiving a lump sum to maximise their entitlement and also to minimise risk where it comes from using money where they don't necessarily need to, through to potential family members.
Mr. Gallen, you may have heard, you would have heard earlier evidence, but on the lump sums, but we've had evidence that with some people, especially Indigenous people, because of their culture, that they are requesting that we have interim payments and stall payments because of the what's mine is yours situation. And not only, as Senator Moore has pointed out, it's not only Indigenous, other children who can sometimes exploit their parents in all communities. But do you understand why that can be, that some people actually prefer not to have a lump sum, to have a partial payment through the system?
In answer to that question, Senator, yes, there is some sense to offering as an option people receiving monies in a lump sum payment. One of the things that we did was to talk to the Aboriginal engagement officers that work at No More Legal Service, and we were really keen to discover from the people that received monies from the New South Wales Stolen Generation in 2016, actually what happened to that money. What was some good things that happened to that money, or what was some negative things that happened to that money? And most importantly, what advice would Indigenous people provide to organisations about how best they would say this money could be provided? Some of the answers that we received back from people was issues around making sure that you buy stuff for yourself, so getting that kind of message out about the importance.
Culture is something that doesn't happen that way. You know, it's like, mine is yours, we share, and so therefore, I mean, sensibly, yes, you say make sure your money goes to you. You're being compensated for the horror you went through, but sometimes families sort of intervene, and it's so inherent in your life.
That's right, and certainly looking at the way in which you look at not paying off loans.
Sorry, can I interrupt you and introduce Ms. Lauren Levin? Thank you for joining us now, just for the record, and carry on.
No problems.
You're fine.
I take your point, Senator, around some of the cultural issues to do with what is colloquially termed as heartbreaking, and I'm not here to provide a fulsome answer to this question, because these are issues that are well known. These are issues that have been long-standing, and I suppose my point is that seeking the advice of Indigenous organisations is certainly the work that we've tried to do to get our heads around this particular issue, and certainly the themes that are coming through from people that receive money from the New South Wales Stolen Generation was locally hang out with the people who support you receiving this money. Buy something for yourself. We saw a lot of family members that bullied us to get money, so trying to potentially set up a separate bank account. Don't pay off your loans for your kids. So thematically, there were messages that were coming through, and I suppose I do know that No More Legal Service themselves are looking at trying to get that kind of information out through their Aboriginal engagement officers as part of the response.
I mean, I bought my kid a car. It's hardly a solution to the problem.
No, and obviously in other areas, I've heard terrible stories of families that have had these things happen, where in fact the trauma happens a second time, because financially the money that they receive then goes to pay for something that they receive no particular benefit from. So thematically, it's around pushing the theme around having the benefit for yourself, and maybe quarantining potentially a section of money that will help other family members.
A corny question, but how do people find you? How do redress victims, how do they find you?
At the moment, there are two ways. One is there's a telephone number, 1800 007 007, and as mentioned, there are 850 odd financial counsellors around Australia working in the local community centres, Salvation Army, Animal Care, community legal centres, and the like. So I suppose the submission that was put together by Lauren advocates that there's a lot of sense to have financial counselling as part of an overall response, and we see that the best way that occurs is in two ways. One is having financial counsellors working alongside lawyers, social workers, and in particular Aboriginal engagement workers at Nomore, as well as receiving some potential support for the 1800.
But if you've been abused by a Salvation Army person, you're not likely to go back to the Salvation Army for advice, are you?
That's right, and for that reason we're suggesting that to support, with the greatest respect to these organisations, that it's better public money spent if it wasn't going to church-based institutions rather than potentially 1800 numbers as well as
Ms. Levin, do you want to make a statement at all?
Yes, you've kind of covered different pieces. I might come in and say what we proposed is a secular model, and starting with the National Debt Helpline, the 007 number, we're already getting people calling that number, and how it works best is as a first response and a triage service. So the National Debt Helpline, the benefit of it is that people can call and they can speak to a financial counsellor that day. They don't have to make an appointment 2 or 3 weeks ahead. They don't have to get told, sorry, we're busy. We're going to take urgent calls, urgent clients first, which is what face-to-face services do. And they'll be able to tell their story, get some help, and financial counselling works on a model that those who can help themselves, you give a bit of help, you don't do it for them, you empower them to go and use that. But if it gets too difficult, you can then refer to a face-to-face service. And it's called a warm referral, so they don't have to repeat their story over again.
Would you find out that somebody is terminally ill, and we fast-track them, and does that happen?
Financial counselling is totally individual, so behind every person coming forward, there's a story. Financial being in difficulty doesn't happen in a vacuum. So that's part of the counselling skill, is to work out what's happening in the person's life, to deal not only with what presents but what's underneath. So yes, they would. If the person disclosed that, they would find out. Sometimes it's something that happens when there's a bit of trust built up, and not everyone wants to disclose everything about themselves up front, and that's their choice. But
yes, I should add, Senator, that I am aware that whilst the rollout of the National Redress Scheme is starting with Victorian and New South Wales government institution claimants, those people that are terminally ill are able to make already an application through the NRS.
What's in the middle?
Okay. No, I'm very consultative down this end of the table. Thank you, Chair. Thank you both very much for your evidence here, and you certainly put a quite compelling case to the need to provide some funding for specialist financial counsellors. I'm wondering, given the and I'm sure we're all in electorates or states that we represent where we know these stories from community services in general about the under-resourced nature of their existence. Would you, how would you purport to best service people who might not, for example, live in metropolitan capital cities? Perhaps we'll take that first question in your model. As I understand it, you want your financial counsellors on the National Debt Hotline or Helpline number, and you've also got some to work in with the No More team. So can you just tell me how you would provide an outreach service to people living in more isolated parts of a very vast continent?
think No More Legal Service would say that they travel extensively as a result of their work. They do have 3 offices at the moment, as you're probably aware, Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne. There's soon to open one in Perth, but they have an extensive travel arrangement where they do go out into various parts of the country to provide that particular service. Having said that, one of the pieces of work that Financial Counselling Australia is currently doing is running some webinar training, specialist webinar training for financial counsellors around the country. So we've got 6 planned over the next 2 months to lift the overall level of knowledge base of the financial counsellors themselves. So hopefully through these particular endeavours, then people in regional and rural Australia will be connected.
I think it'd be a really important consideration for you, because in any proposal that you are, putting to government, I don't know, have you put this to government already?
Yes, there have been meetings held with the Department of Social Service, but at the moment the position of the department is that their existing funding envelope should best be able to meet the needs of claimants through the NRS, and as I think I've already pointed out, that's a view that I don't hold, simply because of the reasons I said.
Yeah. And I guess, we took evidence earlier today around some of the people working in the counselling and psychological services who are also making clear that additional work would require additional funds in order to do their work, basically. But one of the live issues from that is that, and I come from Newcastle, it's hardly a, backwater and city. I'm the 2nd largest city in New South Wales. I have a 6-month wait list for the psychological services, the trauma-informed practitioners. My financial counsellors are completely maxed out. I know that. They meet with me regularly. I would put to you that those issues would be, tenfold in less sort of, in more regional spaces as well.
That's exactly why we're here, because it just won't work as it is, and it just seems really wrong to set people up with a process that's going to fail. And the other part that I'm concerned about, this type of, there's bread and butter financial counselling. So there's the things in the Royal Commission with responsible lending issues, people having a $50,000 credit card debts when they've only got a small income. Those are bread and butter things, and any financial counsellor can do that. But there are a whole lot of issues in the redress space that people just wouldn't know because of, unless they were upskilled. The legislation that came in that protected government debt from being redress money from going towards government debt. So someone comes in with an ATO debt or a Centrelink debt, and
before you came in, Mr. Garton actually obliquely waved the flag about the problems with banks, and I think you're referring to the Royal Commission at the moment, what's going on in the way that money is being exploited by the banks and how people are being exploited by the banks. And I would say that some people with their money from redress would be in the past exploited by the banks. So it's a very good warning you put up.
It is, and before Mr. Sarris, just in response to that, Senator, one of the positive, dare I say, outcomes from discussions with the Australian Banking Association recently is that they, in consultation with their 17 member banks, have agreed to quarantine any debt recovery action against those people that receive a redress lump sum. So that's a positive start.
Well, if you're taking money from dead men's estates, as Nick Young would say, stealing pennies from dead men's eyes, it's not much of a big jump, a quantum leap, to suddenly start taking $35,000 from a redress victim.
I completely agree, and maybe the Royal Commission has led the Australian Banking Association to make this announcement recently. So I certainly get your point there. And we're also talking to telcos and energy companies in respect to them doing likewise.
So that's, there are already tests out there, but there are pathways that have been made to help preserve the intention of the scheme. And that's why we want a group of upskilled, centralised financial counsellors who actually know exactly what's being planned and can then go and do the special redress mechanism plus the regular financial counselling. So you take a person who's got, say, getting a $100,000 payment and they've got a $50,000 credit card. You wouldn't want that money going necessarily going to pay off their credit card debt, because in the financial counselor's regular bag of tricks, there are pathways to deal with that under the responsible lending legislation. So I think it's just crucial that we have this centralised group of upskilled financial counsellors. We've estimated we need it for about 3 years, and there'll still be some people who come through the front door, come through other doors, or come through some of the existing networks, and they'll also need to be aware of who they can consult to find out what they need to do in this space. And that we'll do in financial counselling. That having a group of specialists would lead to better outcomes.
Thank you. I'm interested to know what the department has said when you spoke to them.
The department said, Senator, that the existing funding envelope is appropriate and adequate enough for this particular kind of advice to be offered. When we pointed out that, for example, the state of Tasmania the sole employer is Anglicare, and when we pointed out that 50% of the financial counselling services are faith-based institutions, and whilst I'm not here to be critical of those people, of course, but from the perspective of the client, the association is such that would be very difficult. They were not really, they didn't make any change in their views. So in other words, I think they believe that we should be able to work around that.
We also wrote to the previous minister about 2 or 3 months ago to request this extra funding, but nothing came of that either.
I just remember when I was working in this field with you, the minister was the current Prime Minister, and perhaps it might be useful to contact him directly. When we had the national conference in Canberra or Melbourne, somewhere, and the current Prime Minister was the person who came and talked about the importance of your services and how it should be well funded. And so, yeah, I don't know. It's just it's so important, and I know no more feels very strongly about this being a service that works well with what they're doing.
With the National Debt Helpline, that started formally about 5 years ago, and there's a service there's an agency in each state that answers the phone. And every year there's been significant increases. From in the last calendar year there was a 12% increase, and over the past 5 years there's been a 120% increase. And that's probably due to more people knowing about the service. We've got a national brand now, and also maybe due to underlying demand. But they haven't had any increases in funding, and in fact they're going to lose some funding because some positions were funded through an ethic enforceable undertaking, and that money is ending. So we've really got we've got quite a problem in delivering the service without getting extra funding.
The average payment that's been estimated under the NRS is $76,000. For a lot of people that will be receiving this money, this will probably be one of the first times that they're going to have a lump sum payment. So you want to make sure, irrespective of the well-put arguments around the adequacy of the amount of money that's being paid, you want to make sure that either through issues of financial literacy or having nuanced conversations where you balance someone's right to do with the money what they wish with making sure that they maximise their benefit and minimise harm, be it through advocating with a bank around a debt or trying to maximise that amount. That's where I think there's going to be real benefits. And that's really for me, the central part of all this conversation today.
And mitigating abuse. And it's just a regular part of financial counselling that we see elder abuse. we see financial abuse.
Most of the people who we're talking to now, because of the way it will happen, will be in their 60s and 70s. Would that be fair to say?
That's right. That's right.
Even 80s and 90s. We know some in 90s.
That's right. In fact, as I understand it to date, with the NRS, about 2/3 of the people that have inquired are certainly over 55, 60 years of age and male, and 1/3 female. So the issues around, in particular, if someone's on an age pension. So if we imagine someone's on an age pension, they've got a small house somewhere in rural New South Wales, they're going to receive this amount of money. That person would benefit from, and let's say they've got a credit card debt, as Lauren was saying earlier.
Because they're set up to be exploited, aren't they? They're absolutely sitting there ready to be taken by somebody.
And a trusted advocate that can help navigate some of these things. And it may well be, if you in talking to that person, that they might want to spend half of that money on something for them, which is fantastic. They might want to put the other half aside. So looking at how best that can work, and having some of those kinds of conversations, I think would be something that would be beneficial to people.
Just one other question. We talked earlier about the issue of mandatory services and ensuring that the people who are in receipt of these payments are not feeling as though they are being they're subject to some kind of scrutiny about how they're going to spend their money, and how you balance those messages and have it clearly as a supportive option rather than a judgment that they aren't able to handle the money. So it's very much a marketing approach, and I know that's something you're very much aware of, but it is certainly throughout a lot of these areas that the trust between the people who are in the system and the system is very low.
So for that reason, if you look at an organisation like No More Legal Service or the 1-800 number, but No More in particular has got a trusted relationship with the person, and so you're absolutely 100% correct. Even though there is a recommendation out of the Royal Commission that financial counselling be offered, in no way, shape or form should that be interpreted, number one, as being mandatory. Secondly, people won't be thinking about what they're going to be doing for lunch, or necessarily thinking about that at the time that they're applying and going through the NRS, because as you would have heard evidence, the length of the form and the need for support is the key issue. But finally, if there can be that kind of nuanced conversation, and if you pick up on even the issue of elder abuse, so Senator Hinch is saying, the amount of the age of people that may well be that they might be susceptible to elder abuse, that also can be something that can be addressed through having an integrated service, because I think that will be an issue that we're going to have to be across.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I was just wanting really to just sort of get on record some details of the proposal here, which is really your request is to secure 2.145 million per annum over the next 3 years to employ 10 specialist financial counsellors who would work as part of the sort of No More team, as I understand, and 6.5 FT counsellors on the National Debt Helpline. And as I understand it, one of the critical components is that the need for specialist trained financial counsellors who are trained in sort of trauma-informed counselling support, because you are not necessarily going to have that skill set when you just rock up to a financial counsellor based anywhere else.
It's a combination of the trauma-informed care training, but also the nuts and bolts of what you tell a person about their centrelink benefit, how their centrelink benefit is going to be affected, how their rental is going to be affected, how the ATO will treat a lump sum. It's totally different from other forms of income. So there's a whole lot of technical bits and pieces that need to be lined up.
Okay, helpful, thank you. I'm just trying to have on record why you need a specialised service, why the 16.5 people are critical to And I guess I'm just trying to also just go back to that question around the regional support, because in addition to, I mean, Know-How has got offices in capital cities only at this point. Is it your helpline that you think is going to be the main source of point of contact, perhaps for people living in, I don't know, Walgett, Ballarat, you know, places that are too far to travel to capital city?
It has to be on an individual basis. So the National Debt Helpline can obviously, it's set up to service people wherever they are to get the same service. And but most of the financial counselling is actually in regional organisations and in lower socioeconomic areas, and there are a whole lot in remote areas. So we always work in an integrated way, and we always form referrals. And that's still a possibility, but the front door, the front end would be from the trained, the redress trained financial counsellors.
Short of having, look, financial counsellors are in every part of Australia. They have the complete reach, and as we said earlier, we are rolling out training for all of those financial counsellors around the basic elements of this particular exercise. So that's number one. Number two, the National Redress Scheme, the Debt Repayment Helpline, the 007 is state-based, and thirdly, if there was specialist financial counsellors employed through NOMOR who have a travel budget and would, if they were sitting here, would give that commitment to providing that service in those areas, then that's exactly what would take place. So I just wanted, I think your point around not forgetting regional rural Australia is absolutely on the money, but I hope that we, by this response, that you can rest assured that those people would not be without a service.
Thank you. Thank you.
I've got one more question. I've got one more question, and as long as you don't have to answer it if you don't want to questions. And that is that we've had some evidence this morning, critical of no more legal services. I'm wondering if you would point me in the direction as to why it would be critical of no more legal services.
Look, I wasn't here this morning, obviously. For
you
that.
don't have to answer it, but I'm intrigued.
Well, my dealings with NOMOR, I've got the greatest of respect for the work that they do. I do believe that it's fair to say that because the legislation was passed creating the NRS in, I think, June this year or May or June this year, NOMOR had to be ready to start on July the 1st. So over the 5 years that NOMOR was in existence, providing support to people throughout the Royal Commission, at the end of that, so did their funding cease. So what happened was that there was a diminution of staff, and then very quickly, and they were waiting, as I'm aware, for the legislation to be passed. And then when it was passed, they had approximately 4 weeks to start up again. And I think that if there were any criticisms around that time, then maybe that was the reason why that might have been there might have been some delays. But I do know that they have just employed all of their staff and that they're up and operating. And I'm sure if you put that question to the CEO, he'd give that kind of answer.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Mr. Gartland, Mr. Lynn, thanks for your time. Appreciate it. We do appreciate it. Very much so. Thank you. Thank you. And I'd now like to invite and welcome Mr. Matthew Bowden from People with Disability Australia to come forward. Thank you, Mr. Bowden. I hope I didn't mispronounce your name. I welcome you. Information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses and evidence, I believe, has been provided to you. Thank you. So the committee now has your submission. I invite you to make a short opening statement, and at the conclusion of your remarks, I'll invite members of the committee to put questions to you. And for the Hansard record, will you please now state your full name and the capacity in which you appear today, please.
My name is Matthew Bowden. I'm Co-Chief Executive Officer of People with Disability Australia. And I'll make a very brief opening statement. First of all, thank you to the committee for your work and ongoing interest in this issue of accepting the written submission that we made and inviting us to appear today. I'd also like to congratulate the government on the establishment of the scheme. It wasn't an insignificant thing to build, and it was done quickly, and although there might be some issues in it that we'll speak about, absolutely commend the government on the work that they've done and the departments that have been involved in the build of the National Redress Scheme. I'd also like to sort of congratulate the governments around Australia who have signed up for the scheme. That also is a really significant thing for our members and for survivors of people with disability, and the ongoing work that the government's doing around the negotiation with the non-government organisations. These are tricky things to negotiate, and it's fantastic that it's done so well in the early stages of the scheme. Just sort of speak very quickly about some of those points where we would like to still see sort of further improvement or changes. But these aren't things that we haven't raised before, but I think it's really important to reiterate them. We're still concerned about the people who might not be, who are survivors of child sexual abuse, who may not be deemed to be eligible, particularly those people who have been imprisoned for 5 or more years. Yes, the scheme now does allow for the Attorney General or Attorney Generals in the jurisdiction where the person is to make a sort of individual determination. We don't actually have any criteria on how those decisions will be made, and also there isn't an ability for, that we can see at the moment, for that to be appealed should the Attorney General make a decision which isn't favourable to the person who's wanting to make an application and be seen as eligible for the scheme. We have, through our work with people with disability who are survivors, we've seen some unfortunate impact on civil litigation, which is a slightly perverse outcome of the National Redress Scheme. And this is, the fault lays at the hands of the institutions who are the respondents to that civil litigation rather than the government. So I do want to sort of raise it here. We've been seeing during the course of the Royal Commission fairly good responses from institutions, an understanding that it perhaps isn't a very easy thing to go into a court for civil litigation. So a lot of settlements were happening out of court, and we were supporting people through that process. Now, since the introduction of the redress scheme, we've been observing people, so respondents to claims for compensation, getting to a certain dollar amount, or saying that they're happy to provide a certain dollar amount, but beyond that they're saying we'll see you in court. And these dollar amounts are equivalent to what we think may be viewed as a payment that the person would get if they were to be made an offer of redress. So, for example, negotiations getting up until the point of a payment for compensation of $75,000. That might be the amount that the respondent thinks that they would need to pay out of the redress scheme, and it's sort of quite a forceful shove into court or a way to accepting that or going to the redress scheme. Now that's not a good way for a litigant to be responding, and we're wondering whether there might be opportunities for negotiations to happen between the department and some of the larger respondents where we're seeing this happening, to see if there can be a different approach taken in the way that they are behaving as litigants. Another sort of area of our concern is the issue of counselling and the way that counselling is capped, the way that counselling is being provided. People with disability, some people with disability require a very specialist type of counsellor, somebody who's really adept at adjusting the model of therapy to suit the person's communication and or their cognitive needs. So for people with intellectual disability, traditional therapeutic models of cognitive-based therapy might be inappropriate, inaccessible, or they may need some adjustment. People therefore may need to have counselling that is being provided by somebody that they've known in the past. The scheme as it's sort of currently set up doesn't necessarily allow for a person to maintain that ongoing relationship with a specialised counsellor. I mean, rapport, isn't it, and relationship on itself is an important thing. But then I think we're also adding onto this a level of expertise around disability and making those adjustments that also I think we're saying let's take a look again at the area of counselling. The Royal Commission in its final report made the recommendation that counselling should be uncapped or words to that effect, you know, that there were no limits. Yes, lifelong and no limits sort of placed on it. We continue to support that recommendation. We think it's really significant. It shouldn't be capped. Counsellors are doing, you know, very, very important work. People's safety and well-being and their survival can sometimes depend on that access to therapeutic support and counselling. So it can't be underestimated. It shouldn't be calculated as an assessment of somebody's need at the time that they are accepting a redress payment. People's needs for therapeutic support can vary, and they might have triggers down the track that nobody could foresee. That's right, exactly, and that they and nobody else could actually foresee that might be a trigger for, again, some, you know, intensive therapeutic support at that time to keep the person alive, to keep them well, and assist them as a survivor. And I think that, you know, this really should be an area that's looked at. Another sort of area is about the counselling that isn't currently made available to associates of the person who is the survivor. Now, in the disability space where we're working, we are often working with people in a family context. We're working with people whose parents might be feeling extremely guilty for the decision that they made to place their child into institutional care at a time where there was no other option given to their son or daughter for supports to be made available in the community or in the home, and so the family were compelled to release their child into the care of the institution where the assault happened or assaults happened. Now, living with that is extremely difficult. We see that as a big struggle for some of the parents and family members of our clients, and we think that these schemes should actually be making counselling available for family members who are affected, because it's a significant issue that people are living with. I know that other applications or submissions have sort of gone to this point as well, but we're also sort of concerned about the access that institutions will have to the information provided by the redress scheme applicants. There's part of the application form that, you know, specifically outlines which sections will be shared or may be shared with the institutions responsible for the survivor's abuse. But, you know, we're concerned that this may deter and confront possible applicants, and those are things that we're discussing with our clients as they're approaching us for support at the moment. Is just that they just don't want the not in all instances, but some people just really do not want the institution to know, for example, what the impact on their life has been. They might feel a degree of embarrassment or shame about some of the things that haven't gone well for them in their life because of the impact of the sexual abuse. And we think that people should be able to have that dignity to say what has happened, but not actually sort of go to the impact. That's outlines.
Mr. Bowden, thank you for that. I'm going to have about 2 or 3 questions. One of them, going back to your early comments, talking about redress and civil action. Earlier this morning, other evidence, and I was raising these questions, I've had anecdotal evidence from people saying that redress and the boundaries set at 35, 50, 76 average, that is affecting civil cases. That people are thinking now that the payments that they may have got of 250, 300,000 are being really adversely affected because of this. Now, I'd like you to expand on that a little bit if you can.
Sure. So, I definitely agree with what you've heard earlier, based on what you've just said. The difference between redress and compensation doesn't seem to be being appreciated or understood, or perhaps it's a convenient let-off from the legal obligation to compensate when an injury is caused or injuries are caused. Redress is a different thing altogether. So that's partly some of the messaging, I think, that might need to be done between the government and its departments and the institutions coming into the scheme, that this isn't compensation, this is actually a redress payment. And so that's one piece of work that should happen. But we are absolutely seeing that where we're working with clients at the moment who, as I said, they're not being offered out-of-court settlements as was happening prior to the redress scheme coming on board. They are reaching a ceiling where we think it's an equivalent amount of money where the institution is saying we'll pay up until this much, which is what they think they will pay out of the redress scheme. And they're being really hard about this and just sort of saying, see you in court if you don't accept this. So the willingness to be sort of more survivor-friendly, if you like, and of course, it's a more trauma-informed approach, is to try and deal with these issues not in an adversarial way, not in court where people, aren't going to be cross-examined. To try and sort of deal with a settlement in that way is better for the survivor. You'd hope that they would see it as better for them as well. But the institution is sort of saying, okay, we've signed up for this redress scheme and we're going to translate what happens over there. What happens over
the
here.
yardstick.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, a really diverse outcome, and something that we weren't anticipating was going to happen when we were supporting the idea for redress. And we think that work needs to be done in that space.
You I think, being very modest in your submission. You refer to counselling under redress as being inadequate. I think the word you used. You made a point earlier today, so I think it's very important about the ceiling on counselling. I don't think that the scheme has ever taken into consideration the fact that I said this morning, even filling in the form may trigger something. You may have not had counselling for 10 years, but suddenly you need it. Also, the Catholic priest who molested you may be in court for the first time in 30 years, and that's the first time you've seen his name in 10 years. That may trigger your need for counselling. That has been totally ignored, hasn't it?
Yeah, I don't think it's been fully understood. I mean, if it's been appreciated, I don't think that the $5,000 of counselling in a lifetime is going to sort of go there for some people. For some people, it would be enough, but it's not for everybody. So why have a cap on it? People aren't going to be abusing or using counselling. I mean, those of us that have been in, yeah, I mean, that's right. those of us that have been in psychotherapy, it's not an easy thing to go through. It's not an enjoyable, pleasurable activity. It's tough and it's hard work, and you do it when you need to. You're not doing it because it's it's fun. And so I think that more positive regard should be given to both counselling, but also the survivor, to know that when they need it, they should be able to have it. And I think that the recommendation by the Royal Commission around this being lifelong, it being unlimited, was a very, very sensible, but a just response for a society where we fail children and harms have happened.
One final question from me. I know you have to go. There's 7 more. Thank you.
I'm so sorry.
Thanks for that.
Thank you.
My final question, and it may sound naive, but is there any risk, because of the way financial payments are asking things like, if you got paid some other money from a non-sexual assault, and we need to know this in the application, is there any risk at all that any money you're paid under the new NDIS scheme can abort anything you're entitled to under redress? I don't know the answer.
I wouldn't have thought so. No, not that I'm aware of. I don't think that.
I hope not. But no,
yeah,
nothing's guaranteed.
No, I don't. We haven't seen any problems between or the person's receipts of their NDIS plan and its monies and its redress.
For you, gentlemen.
Thank you, and thank you for raising some of these issues that I know have been talked about but have not often been on the priority in the agenda. I think that's one of the issues. Sharon's major issue was around the counselling, which has been raised consistently all the way through the Commission, all the way since the Commission. But her question was around the fact that you work nationally in your organisation. One of the ongoing issues is the variation of access depending on where you live. Has the approach that has been taken by the governments working together, leading the decisions around counselling to individual governments, caused any particular concern to your grouping, your membership?
It has, because again, the selection of the preferred counsellor for a particular jurisdiction may not be where the person with disability wants to receive their counselling from. They might have had previous experience that's been negative or not great with that particular provider of counselling support, and the person's still going to sort of need to fit into the way that particular group provides counselling services to survivors and to victims of crime. So that doesn't work for everybody, both issues of geographic isolation and access, but also for disability access, and the points that I made earlier about some people requiring very specialist supports around their communication access needs, or the way that therapy needs to be tailored so that it's meaningful, that it actually does provide treatment and move somebody to a better paid space, is often not provided by a generic or generalist counsellor. Even somebody who has good trauma-informed support, although we also have seen some of the counsellors not being great around trauma approach. Add on to that those issues around disability access, and sometimes they sort of throw their hands up and think that this just cannot be done, and people are left without counselling.
There has been ongoing discussion with your organisation over the last few years about issues around disability. And one of the positive things is that there's been more formal consultation being done, however people define the term consultation. But in terms of the process, have you had a chance to raise these particular issues about consultation directly with the Minister? Because in fact it's the Minister with whom you work in much of your other activities. So have you had a chance to raise this with the Minister?
Not the current minister, but the minister when he was working on the build of the scheme. I mean, I was one of the people invited to join the advisory council on establishing the redress scheme, and so provided all of that feedback.
That awareness of the particular needs of people who identify with a disability was acknowledged through that process.
It was indeed, yeah, that's right. So, you know, the other sort of area of sort of feedback to the government and the minister was around the sort of need to reach people with disability, and just as we were having this continual discussion with the Royal Commission whilst it was going, was the problem for people with disability is knowing about the scheme, or knowing about the Royal Commission as it was then, having assistance to come forward because of the significant and multiple barriers that people can face in terms of coming forward. Many adult survivors with disability are still reliant on the institution where the abuse happens to them as a child for their housing and support today. So many survivors with disability are in quite a unique position and quite, you know, unlike other survivors, and do require that very active support and engagement, in-reach, outreach, to actually get to the point of knowing that what their experiences were constituted child sexual abuse, because many adult survivors won't actually know that. They've experienced multiple forms of violence and abuse throughout their life. Violence has become a norm, and so being able to yes, know that what happened to them might mean that as a child that this scheme is something meaningful and might bring a positive outcome for them. That's the work that we really sort of need to do.
So from your understanding, because there has been a number of inquiries at state and at least one Senate inquiry into violence against people with disabilities within institutions, from your understanding, has that group actually been effectively engaged in this process? Because a number of the findings that came out of the Senate Committee on Violence Against People with Disabilities in Institutions clearly identified sexual abuse for people within those institutions. Do you know, it's certainly a question I'm sure our department as well, whether that particular group, of which there are way too many, have been actively engaged in the Royal Commission and subsequently in this particular process of compensation?
Some of the group, to a certain extent, Charles. I mean, we were funded to be a support service through the duration of the Royal Commission. So we were able to reach some people, but it really was the tip of the iceberg. And the pushback from institutions was enormous in some aspects. We're actively blocking access to information, blocking access to advocates, interfering with the relationship between us and survivors. It's something that happened as well, where people's family members were told, did you know that your family member is speaking to these advocates about child sexual abuse in the institution? And then, you know what I mean, breaches of privacy and really quite sinister behaviour was occurring. And, you know, some of these institutions, the government institutions as well, something that we saw just happening in the non-government sector.
And you point about people being differently to many of the other people involved in this process, being still reliant, and that is a significant difference. So, one more question. In terms of the advisory group, did that offer opportunities for your organisation to then mix with other organisations that work in the field of child abuse? So there does tend to be in our community sector a degree of siloing, so that people are so overwhelmingly busy and caught up in the work that they're doing that perhaps the opportunity to work together is not as well resourced as it could be. So the fact that we do have organisations across the states that focus on the wider institutional issues of child abuse, has that given you some opportunities to meet more and share knowledge and resources?
It has, and we've had an active engagement with the other community-based support services. We've provided disability awareness training to many of those organisations to attempt to sort of change some of the culture and practice and sort of lift the competence in organisation has also been positively changed because of our contact with those child sexual assault services, whether around the country. So I think that there's been a sort of mutually beneficial relationship. We get called on for providing advice or our expertise when there might be sort of client issues or policy issues that come up in those organisations. And so it's a very useful space that we now inhabit and continue to during the sort of redress scheme. But of course, it sort of needs time to sort of continue to really deliver some of those lasting cultural change.
What's your understanding of any ongoing, we asked previous questions of other witnesses this morning, your understanding of further work for the reference committee? Because the reference committee was set up for a particular purpose and had a number of meetings. Are you aware of whether the government intends to keep working with you as a group? Because this program is supposed to go for 10 years. Some people have said it shouldn't end, but 10 years is where it operates. Are you aware from your organisation's perspective whether there's an intent to continue having this kind of work, or whether, as some other witnesses said, they just don't know?
I don't know either. I understand that our role has ceased, and we've received a letter thanking us for our involvement, which was great. And from what I've been told so far, that it's ended. But I do think it would be very useful to bring that group together again, particularly, I think that there's the 2-year.
You were talking about the same thing this morning with some other witnesses. It might be useful if we can leave that with you to see whether that could be something that goes with the minister. I mean, I certainly have a view that the more people who are working with governments of any flavour over such an ongoing kind of program, the better. And they went to the trouble of setting up a reference group of people with knowledge and engagement and passion.
One addition to the things like today is that we had a government senator here who was saying to me, we must get Centrelink up now and talk to them, because the issues you've raised about Centrelink are very important ones, and therefore we can learn and grow from that. So it's very important.
Maybe it's the delivery of your report that might be the trigger to kind of look at the recommendations or things coming from your report that might be good for a committee to sort of come back.
Just very interested in your view as someone who took part in that process, and we'll be asking other organisations, all of whom have provided submissions to this committee, because they continue to be engaged about their views about that, which could be of value to the community, to the minister. And just one last area that Senator Hinch has reminded me, Centrelink. Such a critical organisation, the need for this ongoing work. We had evidence before, and you just touched on it in your evidence as well, that it is a difficult and sometimes complex relationship with people working through the Centrelink process. Sometimes there's an interesting use of words, but there are problems, and Centrelink know that. Is there any ongoing work that your organisation does with Centrelink? Because we know a lot of the members of your organisation across the world and across the country have problems with the DSP process and so on. This is now going to be the same organisation that has to be the gateway. Every person who is going through this particular program is to use Centrelink as the gateway. Is there any kind of linkage now that you're aware of with your group to keep those issues, the conversation going with Centrelink? Because it's a very central role they play.
Well, we've provided a lot of, we worked really closely with the Department of Human Services for the design of their forms and processes around disability access.
How's that going? No, we won't go there.
But, and they've really listened. They've done a good job, and, some of the people that we're supporting have provided positive feedback about the form and how people, in their minds, they thought it was going to be really onerous and horrible and an awful form. but they actually found that it wasn't too bad with support sort of go through it. So the idea of it was a lot worse than the reality was, which is really positive. That's, I guess.
I think that's a very positive comment. We've
So
heard
you
that
get it
before,
writing.
so we'll keep that. There's a box around that. But you've actually had that feedback, which
Yeah,
is good
we
to hear
have.
that
People
some
have
people have had that experience. Yeah.
And you know, because people have, I think, had not great experiences with other government processes and using forms and things, and they have found, particularly those, I forget where the actual the question numbers in the form, but there are those boxes where people are able to circle and select the words that might be associated with the abuse that they've had or the impact of the abuse. And that was viewed by people as a really positive way of getting the information down. That was feedback given to me.
We had previous evidence that that was one of the things people really hated most,
They didn't
which is
like
always,
it.
which is
Things
always
like
the case.
fertility, didn't
There
they?
is, there is always the case in any discussion where you're going to have a range of views about a particular thing, but I think it's very good for the department to hear that at least some people found that useful because they have heard that other people haven't. So that it reinforces the issue about the need for quite personalised discussion about what works for particular groups, because you have to be more flexible, and I think that's the issue. So, yeah. Flexible and responsive. Yeah.
I mean, but on the flip side, we've had you know, some negative feedback about the helpline for the DHS helpline for the scheme. So, where people have not felt that their disability has been understood or their access needs understood. And, you know, this will be work that we do ongoing with DHS around hopefully improving people's experience over the phone with the people that take calls.
Thank you, Mr. Bowden. I appreciate that. We all appreciate that. And thank you for your time. Thank you. We might take we'll adjourn for just 5 or 10 minutes, that's all. Then we'll